So, hello and welcome, guys, to Cyber Diaries Podcast. My name is Marius from MP Cybersecurity, and we have a wonderful guest today with us, Frank from Phoenix Security. So, I'll let you, Frank, introduce yourself and those of you who might not be aware of who you are, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Marius. I really appreciate the time and always happy to chat with you, Mario. So I'm Frank for friends, or Francesco Cipollone for everyone else. It's becoming a common joke on the Cyberwalk that I start like that. So I think I'm gonna make it into a signature start of the sentence awkward moment. But I've been a practitioner for most of my life, helping organizations from an enterprise perspective move to the cloud in a secure way and develop their software. And more recently, more recently, 3 years ago, we spun out one of our internal projects that ended up being a massive project that is Phoenix Security. That ended up defining a new category of things. I know folks hates categories, but ended up defining ASPM as a category. But I'm a public speaker. Wrote several books as well, very involved with the community because I think giving back to the community is super important, as well as mentoring. So I've been running Minty, a mentoring program. I know that you're very close to that, especially for women in cyber, because they don't get that level of confidence sometimes, and they need some extra support at the beginning. And likely enough, the situation is changing for women in cyber. I've seen some very good success story both from my mentee and in general in the industry, where we see a lot more diversity into the picture. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Brilliant. Thanks for coming along, to chat with us. But I guess to start off, we kind of touched a bit about, engagement and community. And I think it's very important, to drive engagement, as we know, even I think the last few posts I mentioned, cold sales and cold emails are probably dead. But, you mentioned building a new category and, ASPM, which is Application Security Posture Management. So I wanted to touch and probably delve a bit deeper. So, why that specific category, and how this, I guess that's how was born Phoenix Security. But if you can just talk through the journey, why was that category chosen, and how it evolved over the last few years.
No, that's brilliant. And we never meant to define a new category, because I hate defining new category, but I think people like to put you in a box, and our box was so new and so different that we end up defining a category. And we developed a product for ourselves. So I used to run application security and cloud security for HSBC as a practice inside the investment banking. And with that, we had the need to kind of connect engineering, security, and business all in the same triangle. And we had way to communicate with the engineers, shifting left or shifting right, bringing some of the technology to the engineering community with security champion practice, as well as bringing some of the practices of security into the engineering with threat modeling and a few other things. But they never were authorized to actually work on security. So when we were talking about security was a fluffy word, especially during digital transformation. Was always, yes, we need to be more secure. But what that actually meant for engineers was very fluffy. Do we do threat modeling? Do we do pen testing? Do we do security scan? How much we fix? Half a kilo vulnerability, 10 vulnerability? Like, it was fluffy. So it ended up causing more friction and confusion. And as any initiative from an enterprise perspective, super buzzing, but then everybody kind of wear off that. So we wanted to create something that enabled us to, first of all, representing with confidence which asset we were building and where we were running, to paint fundamentally a good picture of a software and runtime environment, linking the two elements together and attributing the right problem to the right team. So instead of telling them, look, this is a backlog of 4 million vulnerabilities, look at this 10 vulnerability for next sprint. That's the things we wanted to achieve. But in order to do that, we needed to involve business, and there wasn't anything in the market that was fulfilling that. So we decided to create for our own, and communicating the risk level to the business and letting them choose to how how at risk they wanted to be, and having that data-driven conversation enabled a much more effective approach where, as a security champion and as a security engineering practice, we were pushing for security to be in the discussion. And then we turned the tide and we were dragged into the discussion because from a security objective, they were set from top down. So from a business perspective, there was a security objective that was very, very clear, and that could be translated into a number of actions from an engineering perspective. So that flow gave us the authority to actually say, look, this is the stuff that needs to be solved. It's not my risk, it's the business risk. Now let me help you achieving that objective faster. Let me get you there faster. Like, you have 4 input validation issue. If you fix with this input validation library from OWASP, you can fix X number of volumetrics, 500 volumetric, 50 vulnerability. So instead of spending 10, 15, 20 story point, you can spend 5 story point doing some regression testing, and you're there. And all of a sudden, our team was loved and we were dragged. We are actually pushing back engineers from involving us into these stories. But it became kind of managing this problem and enabling kind of a language translator between the business, engineering, and security, and kind of aligning everybody in what I call the triangle of or the shift everywhere. Call it whatever you want. Somebody hates the shift everywhere. Somebody likes shift everywhere. I like the idea of shifting everywhere because it involves business, security, and development community. But that's what we ended up creating, and there wasn't nothing out there, and we struggled to define it for so long. Originally, it was called XSPM. We were debating with Ghana to call it XSPM because it was extended and extensive posture management across cloud, container, infrastructure, because the way organization build security nowadays, I think it's very, very different from the way organization used to build software a few years ago, 5, 10 years ago. And what the border between application security and runtime security, platform security is getting blurry. The ownership is getting blurry. So having a way to actually dealing with these boundaries and a flexible way to deal with these boundaries is super important. And at the same time, enabling security team to operate with a data-driven approach. Going and begging for security to be fixed is not going to happen, especially in this challenging time when we have less security resource, less engineering resource. Everybody's focusing on not failing or not delivering features. So making a strong business case for fixing security is particularly modern or
Yeah, I
particularly
think
actual.
Yeah, I think it's very important because obviously, when we start speaking about, especially, when you go to, I guess, reporting metrics and things like that, where you talk about, maturity of organizations, sort of vulnerability management program as such, you get to a point where you have unmanageable numbers. So how you reduce that funnel and how you can make decisions on a fly where threat landscape is constantly changing and things like that. So, you kind of touched a few things about threat modeling. So I guess I wanted to pick up on that. So how do you guys match, because obviously there is various ways how you attack whether you develop in an AppSec program or you building a comprehensive DevSecOps framework, how are you guys matching threat modeling, vulnerability management, application security into the one guise that actually makes a credible dent in our, sort of program as such?
That's a great question. And I think we have an answer. I don't know if it's going to be the answer of tomorrow. We, as a startup, we have the leisure to actually try, change, and try with our client and with our community on what works and what doesn't work. From a threat modeling perspective, I think we've seen kind of the split of threat modeling between network-based threat modeling that is easier to associate with network assets and software-based threat modeling that is easier to associate with software component, repository, but more generic product component. Keeping the two threat modeling separated but linked together with this asset inventory and the asset lineage and connection between what you build and where you run helps us kind of attaching the threat modeling to the right set of assets, if you want, or the right set of context, and then bringing that context back into the picture of like, as a software team, you need to care about this. As a platform team, you need to care about this. Or then if you're an SRE team that you build and you own what you build, then you need to care about your software aspect, your environment aspect, your cloud aspect, and all the threat modeling that comes with it. I think one thing that we are experimenting a little bit is validating the threat modeling. And I think there is only one, I think it's called PASTA as a threat modeling methodology, where it basically asks you to validate some of the finding with the vulnerability that are there. And a lot of the threat modeling finding rely on CWE. So we're pivoting on CWE to verify some of these threat modeling findings to say, this is the threat modeling on authentication. There is this bunch of vulnerability that we identify in your software on authentication. But as I said, in early days from the practice of threat modeling altogether, we're experimenting as well with LLM and seeing if we can give the context of a specific set of vulnerabilities and technology stack, kind of validate some of the modeling, as well as modeling compensating control. So we're using MITRE ATT&CK and NIST 853 as a pivot point as well to say, this is the number of vulnerability that you have, this is the CAPEC and MITRE that you have, and then mapping and pivoting on that point to say, these are the compensating control. Sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't make sense. I actually just published a GPT to actually test and try. We can put in the comment for people to test it and try it. But it's an interesting point of pivoting between different elements. When you want to fix a vulnerability on a patching perspective, probably it's not that useful. But understanding the wider context of like what are the attack path and vectors of a particular vulnerability in an infrastructure system helps you also define your compensating control. Do I put a WAF? Do I put a firewall? Do I put a WAF and a firewall, or do I put a host firewall? In the meantime, these things get patched, or do we absolutely need to patch it? And from a software perspective, probably MITRE ATT&CK and the CWE-based culture and vulnerability is easier to actually think and match, because then you can fix a vulnerability in different way, doing a stronger authentication, doing encryption at the border. Depending on the problem, you might address it directly or addressing it on the fringe while you address it directly. I think you have more freedom from a software perspective.
Yeah, I think just, having gazed and looked at the platform, I think there's obviously, we kind of touched some of the benefits, but I just wanted to pick up some of the things, loads of platforms now are obviously building automations or building workflow connections, which is amazing too. But I guess on a flip side as well, to me, when you start working, especially in the software sort of security world, you want to bring developers on a journey. Creating a bunch of tickets normally yields a benefit, very short-lived benefit. So I guess I wanted to pick up, of your idea, how creating, I guess, enough information, inviting developers onto the platform to interact and, improve their security knowledge. How does that improve and scale your AppSec program going forward? Because I always feel like, the more learning and the more material you provide for them to understand why we're fixing specific things, the more benefits it yields.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. And the way we approach the problem, the way I thought to approach the problem is a mix between security champion and training, looking at what kind of mistake each team are making. And that goes back to very precise attribution and automatic attribution of which team works on what. Because then from that intelligence on the vulnerability, we can derive intelligence that drive the security champion program and the kind of issue that people are making, and that can drive as well the threat modeling exercise. So it's not just about opening ticket as well. It's about managing expectation and creating the workflow from a feature perspective. Like from a feature perspective, you can auto-create feature, but why do we manage a backlog and a portfolio of things in a Scrum and Agile way? Because we want to make sure that things are getting worked on consistently. And I'm no for automation. If you develop and if you find an issue there and then, fix it, great. But some element might imply an upgrade of a framework, an upgrade of Java, an upgrade of Strat as a framework, or other major platform frameworks that might require more regression testing. So it's not because you can push it, just push it. But some element might pop up that generate that headache, as well as some element pops up later on, like Log4j has been around for several years and then all of a sudden get weaponized. Rapid reset as well as a HTTP2 vulnerability kind of got weaponized. It was there, it was just a method that wasn't used and got weaponized. So sometimes you need to create campaign of issue, making sure that those are addressed and the ones that are more important are addressed first. So it's about creating that intelligence approach on vulnerability management rather than pure fixing stuff. And I think it's also being in control. You have SLAs, you have OLAs. You don't want to just push patch, because we've seen with Microsoft or other fixes where supply has issued a fix, it wasn't fully tested, it broke the entire system. So if you do that in a controlled way, then you have a control approach on fixing stuff. You can do regression testing, you can do testing. If you just fix everything in an automated way, there might be chances 1, 2, 3 times where the patching methodology gets compromised. So I think is control as well as planning, as well as trying to fix things on the node side of things. Like we've seen new technology actually being developed that create golden images of specific AMI or container that really helps reducing that south stream of vulnerability. But they're complementary. They're not exclusively and mutually exclusively. Like I think as you develop an application security program as an application security expert, I think is one of the most complex work because it's multifaceted, so that there isn't a solution or a silver bullet. And as a vendor, I want to sell a silver bullet, but there isn't one. And as an honest vendor, I tell, look, this solves this particular category of problem. But that's why we went for a platform view, so that you can try to solve the problem in different way and give you enough data points to help you drive in the program in a more efficient way possible. And ultimately, our objective is not to flood with ticket engineering team, but to give them high quality signal with all of the context around risk, around exploitability, around likelihood of exploitation, around contextual aspects, so that that vulnerability is pre-triage. And as an engineering team, you can either review it, add additional context, send it, and not spending ClickOps and opening ticket to the majority of teams.
Yeah,
so being brilliant. In control.
Yeah, and we touched a few things, and you touched we're going to use a swear word. We touched AI and LLM, and I guess from your point of view, there's various obviously thoughts out there in the industry, but in your eyes, AI a friend or a foe in terms of helping? Obviously you touched data points. I guess if you think about sometimes when you have a lot of vulnerabilities, obviously we're talking loads of data points and building statistical models addressing probabilities. I guess LLM can only help. So in your view, AI is friend or a foe?
In that term, is a foe.
Okay.
And in general, AI is a friend and a foe. It depends. It's a tool. AI is a tool. So it depends how you use the tool. So if you use it to 10x your capability and use it intelligently, you 10x yourself and your team. If you just rely on LLM as a source of truth, then you become the tool. And in the good and the way, in the good and the bad way. So being a tool is not usually very nice in the English sense of terms. I think using AI with specific objective, enhancing specific things together with a statistical model. I'll give you an example. If you feed to an AI a vulnerability list, it's only going to look at volumetrics. So you fix this particular vulnerability, and if you just rely on CVE based, then it will focus on the one that has higher CVE and is more frequent and present. But if that vulnerability is actually stored in a server that nobody's touching and using, and it's not even reachable as a vulnerability, what's the point in there? So having the statistical model that contextualize vulnerability and give that context to maybe an LLM that is purposely crafted and driven, and that's the stuff that we're working on, that is much more efficient because it gives you, in that particular context, with that particular vector of information, the answer that you are expecting. That is not garbage, but actually mitigating control for those particular threat emitter and attack vectors. So it's a guided knowledge of the LLM on the stuff that the LLM already know or crafted LLM. But if you just give them a dashboard from Nessus, for example, or from any other vendors, it would just tell there is a bunch of stuff. This is the stuff that is in there, and this is the stuff that is more frequent. But that's fake insight. There's actually just information, and you can't make decision based on information because it's just statistics, and you might as well read a report in that particular way. But having insight on what to fix within the context of your organization is hard to achieve. That's why the ASPM technology was born. But it's much more effective, and it drives change, it drives meaningful change, and it drives attack risk reduction and attack surface reduction much better than just targeting volumetrics. And then you can always target volumetrics, but based on risk. Like, we created a concept called risk magnitude that enable to fundamentally reduce from a volumetric perspective the biggest risk, and relying that on risk rather than pure number of high critical and low CVSS helps you focusing on the risk that really matters in a volumetric way.
Yeah, I think it's very important as well to address there's obviously loads of hype around LLMs, but some people obviously forget that, in order to reap the benefits, you have to be very good at, first of all, prompt engineering and using specific, I've been researching some prompt engineering frameworks, and, there's people might, if you put a generic ask in GPT-4, you're going to get a generic answer. And some people say, oh, it's no use out of it. It depends how you use. But if we flip a bit of a side, and I wanted to touch, I guess, on this point, we're talking about, you are, I guess, at the forefront of building the new product vertical in ASPM. You've been around, quite a few cybersecurity companies. You've done a few positions. You've been to cybersecurity leadership, and then you flipped into product building, I guess, side. So, I guess most of us industry recently have heard about, Ross Halleluck's book, book for cyber builders. But I guess, when you started out, there's very limited information. So I just wanted to touch and, I guess, give maybe some tips or some guidance to people, after you reach a certain level of maturity or leadership, say in security, and people decide whether they go into, risk leadership, CIO. Some people actually go and build products to solve specific problems that they encounter in their career. So how was your path? How did you find, because obviously, I just read that book, normally you don't know how VCs, how, PEs operate. So it's very unheard of, things to learn.
That's a really good question. And I think from one aspect, I see that if you build something internally, it's going to get disbanded at a certain point. That was the hardest lesson learned. Keep on building things internally. Ultimately, you need to maintain it. It's the build versus buy technology. If something is extremely crafted for you, first of all, you should ask yourself why it is so crafted for you, maybe a methodology. And you should look at solution outside if 90% of what you can do can be built. But try to build this several times in several organizations. It's fun, but it's kind of biased because you don't have the constraint that you have normally in the market. Like, you need to win customer, you need to win hard. You need to go and convince a CISO to actually invest in a risky way because it's already a security solution. So it's already a risk reward effort, but also invest in a startup, so double risk. And US tends to be much more keen on risk. Unfortunately, in Europe, there are few pioneers like you and few others that really want to jump in the front foot of startup and opening up startup. So that's a different story. But as a practitioner, you're kind of not exposed to a lot of the challenge that is company building. Like a cybersecurity startup is not about the product. The product is really important, but it's about company building. It's about marketing. It's about maintaining runway. It's about balancing your teams across different level of figure of team. It's about selling. It's about selling to investors, selling to your internal team. It's about selling it externally. A lot of those skills we're not trained on. And I wish I had Rob Haley book when I started, because you don't know a lot of this stuff, like angel investment, cap table. A lot of this information are not out there, and you need to learn those things quickly. Otherwise, you don't look proficient. And 5 years ago, it was a different scenario where there was a lot of capital available and a lot of investment, and people kind of winging the investment game. Right now, capital is really expensive. So people are looking at seasoned, experienced people to actually build company. And I built and exited a company before, so I knew kind of how to run a business, how to scale a business up to a specific point. But a technology business is a completely different beast. And I think the advice is go in a journey. First of all, question yourself, do I really want to get into this journey? And do I have the guts to stick to this journey for 5, 10 years and go through the up and downs? Because it's gruesome and it can put constraint on your family, on your finance, on your friends. And you need to stick with it to actually be really successful. You need to have grit, and you need to account for a lot of these stuff. So just jumping into it, I know that a lot of people just say just do it, but do it with level of consideration, because it's not an easy journey and it's going to take a toll on everything. So preparing your partner, checking your finance that you can be out of pocket, and invest in your startup, especially in Europe, where you need to get to a specific set of revenue before you're going to get some level of funding. Is really important, because it's like taking a calculated risk instead of just going blindfolded into this journey. And I don't want to be negative, because I want to encourage people to have ideas, but it's about building a company. Like Ross says, is cybersecurity startup is about building a company. And sometimes you might have the best product in the world, but you might not, nobody knows about it. So because you haven't invested enough in marketing, advertising, personal branding, and going and advocating about it, and then your company dies, even being the best product in the world. Or you might not have the right connection to the right VC, to the right angel, so you might not breach that noise level that there is in cybersecurity in advertisement, because you need champions in the right position for a CISO to build enough trust level in you and your technology that you're not gonna open a backdoor and be a target for attacker to their company. And it takes a lot of trust, a lot of transparency to actually gain the trust of CISOs, because they need to put their neck on the line to actually trust your organization to be inside their environment. And those are some of the challenges that you don't tend to get. Being on the other side, on the practitioner side, you just buy things. Even just thinking about procurement and the challenge of procurement of certain organization, especially if you target mid-market to enterprise, procurement can kill 8 months. And you might spend an enormous amount of time just going through procurement where you don't have the right insurance, the right size. So you might have the best product, the best team, but still you're going to face people and procurement challenges that you're not prepared for and you're not equipped to actually overcome. And unfortunately, that's how enterprise and mid-market level works. Or if you try to target government, or if you try to target, para-government organization, or kind of public sector organization, that's even worse. That's even harder. So my advice is build a solution. If you really have the gut like us, build a platform, but build a solution that is for mid-market and SME, that can be tested, quickly implemented, that get that quick time to value, so that you build momentum, develop your marketing from day zero, and try to get on this journey with as many people as possible. So the magic number, I think Ross mentioned, is 3. One technologist, one from a marketing perspective that's gonna foster the relationship, and marketing perspective, or a sales or a finance guy. So the third role is kind of, well, because at the beginning, that's the only people you can rely. So the first 10 hire of an organization are super important, and the founder are super important, because at the beginning is an idea, bunch of founder, a deck, and an MVP that you need to go around and sell it both to your investor, to yourself. You need to sell the idea to yourself, and you need to continually refresh, because if you don't believe in it, the company is dead. And it takes the right partner, and you can go through the journey several times. Like you might not hit the right partner at the very beginning, and you need to be okay for that to be life and death of the idea of the company, because sometimes, you know, they start on a line, you might be too early, you might be too late, or you might not have the right team and the right size. There are so many factors that could align. That doesn't mean that your journey is successful, or the opposite is non-successful. So I think going in the startup adventure with finance sorted out, with everybody aware that that's your journey, with support on that journey from a network perspective, I think that's the best way to go about it. And sometimes the answer is no, don't. If you're not able to take into account all of these challenges, it's not life for everyone, and not everybody needs to be an entrepreneur. Sometimes you might be perfectly happy and live a perfect happy life and make a lot of money, even just being a practitioner, being a CISO, being a global CISO. So it's not necessarily the path to make a lot of money.
Yeah,
You might even invest.
Yeah,
You might
well,
invest as an angel.
exactly. There is various paths forward. I just wanted to pick up the last, I guess, question to touch. You mentioned, I guess, building trust, being honest. Obviously, you built various, partnerships, or various, efforts that you work with OWASP, Cloud Security Alliance, and all of these partnerships. I guess, being an expert in the field and building your expertise that you help community, I guess, will help along your product, because you are representing your product, but your expertise aligns of, if I need help in my ASPM journey, Frank is the expert, therefore his potentially product gonna help me in that journey. I think these are the two synergistic things. Like, we can't anymore expect sending emails showcasing, a nice written word that you're gonna solve all your problems. I think these are the new types of, you are appearing in specific community events can spark, conversations that potentially help you in your journey.
Yeah, and I do agree. The go-to-market is changing. I would argue that it has always been like that, because it's a risk reward. Like, it's easy to just send an email. It doesn't deliver any effect on security people that get bombarded by new marketing or new buzzword. And people are getting more shrewd and more knowledgeable about stuff. So I think we're seeing a more product-like growth culture, or trust-like growth culture, where you win the heart and the mind of specific technologies, and that deliver the best value to market, because you're a trusted partner. You're not a vendor that is there to place a technology. And if you build that community goes a long way, because it will support you no matter what. And it will support your face, first of all. So the community at the very beginning is you, bunch of friends, the trust that you bring, and then you build that momentum. So sometimes people think community, oh, I need to build a big platform, I need to build everything. No, at the beginning it was me chairing up the Cloud Security Alliance, and then start expanding on that, building momentum, then OWASP, then building the persona, the profile, white paper. Doing collaborative white paper has been amazing for us and for me, because it gets you connected on a journey, developing an open source project together with other people. It really gets you into that collaboration approach, because in a collaboration way, it can drastically backfire, because you might end up fighting with a lot of people. And you need to be okay with that. Like, as a startup, the best startup are actually the one that are opinionated. So not everyone will agree with your opinion. And being ADHD, I suffer with that a lot, to be personally honest, because I want to make everybody happy. And having had a life in consulting, the answer usually is, I don't know the question, but let's make it happen. So it's challenging, but you need to be okay with that. But at the beginning is your face, and the brand that you build is you, and the trust that they build inside in you. The brand come after. It's almost like attached to you, but it's a proxy trust, as I call it. But start small on a community, on a mailing list, on talking to people, but really the community is the way to build that trust, to build that connection, to build that level of expertise. And it requires a lot. It requires a lot of research. It requires a lot of thought leadership. It requires you to be an expert in the field. And that's why startup is not for everyone, because it takes a toll. It takes all of the weekend that you have. It takes work 90 hours a week, every week for years and years and years. And there is no break, because ultimately the bucket stops with you as a founder for a long time. I would say forever, up until you exit.
Yeah.
In a good or a
Brilliant.
bad way.
Brilliant. And I guess to end our call, I just wanted to get your, final thoughts, since ASPM is becoming a recognized, niche product, and sort of it's creating a vertical for itself. How do you see it evolving over the next few years? Obviously, since its inception, I guess it was difficult, you're having conversations about something that people might not be aware of, but now it's coming on everyone's radar. Where do you see it growing over the next year or two?
That's a great question. I think that the community, and I've been discussing this several times, the ASPM world is splitting into two and is turning into application security scanning technology on a more low friction way, where you have just a bunch of open source solution that you orchestrate and string together and to give access to SME to that application security landscape that traditionally you wouldn't have, because the barrier of application security used to be very high, with specific vendors costing 10 or 20K each, and then you need to string 4 or 5 of them together, and your application security program costs you 50, 100 grand or $100,000 for the one outside the UK. Well, right now, this solution are kind of commoditized scanning from an open source perspective. They used to be really hard because you need to string few things together. And then there is a platform like us that kind of hybrid approach, bring your own scanner or use our own scanner to kind of do that hybrid approach of really asset lineage and asset management. And both from a software perspective and from a cloud perspective, kind of bringing these two worlds together, bringing the psychological aspect of security champion, kind of managing the end-to-end application security lifecycle, and the security posture of your organization and all of your software. I think they will see a split between these two categories, with the AST category, application security testing, being replaced by the ASPM testing. And I think the risk-based vulnerability management, the workflow management will be replaced with what I will call a category, an XSPM category, that is fundamentally dealing with your asset regardless of where they are. And then something in between in terms of innovation. So the one in between probably might struggle a little bit to position themselves. But I think the market is kind of splitting into two, because ultimately the organization have software asset that they need to maintain. They have library, they have SBOM, they have repository, they have teams that they need to inform, they need to influence the stakeholder, and they need to trace what they're building, where they're building. And that's kind of the problem that we had, and there was nothing available out there. So we created one, but we've seen now that organizations are consistently building in the cloud in modern way, the need of something to actually say, what application do I have in production? What is the risk of that application? Even answering that simple question is super hard for organization, because you need to have asset inventory, risk management. And look, if you have a certification, you should probably have some of this in place. Like if you had ISO or SOC 2, you should have this fundamentally in place, but unfortunately, it's not there. But we're seeing a change. Look, from a market perspective, we're seeing the US coming up with regulation on SPOM and asset lineage and security default. So they are going towards the organization that we wish we had everywhere, with label, security label on product, as well as the UK with the new NCSC guidance on vulnerability management and a new position paper that is coming out on what is good software practice in general, and software security label that we should all have, so that we could judge if Ivanti or few other technologies are actually safe and secure to use, or they keep on being safe and secure to use. But yeah, that's my final thought on the ASPM. I think it's going to evolve. It's going to be enterprise SME focus, or lower end of the spectrum SME focus, where you just want scanning tools and you don't care about the complexity of your organization, or you want a risk-based approach if you are sizable enough and you're in finance mostly, or surrounding finance.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant overview. I think the main problem we could probably currently see in the industry is that, the more companies are spending more money to solve more incidents, to fix more vulnerabilities, and, instead of actually addressing the issue why it happens in the first place. And I think the more regulation comes about to build resilience into the business and actually design security from the get-go, and I guess that's where the driven decision is from ASPN. I think that's going to be a next shift in us actually withstand, hopefully incidents and reduce them. So I guess that's where the tide is turning. But anyway, brilliant to have you on board, Frank. Lovely conversation as always. Thank you very much for your time. And obviously, Frank's tagged in our event. So if you have any conversations, if you want to explore a Phoenix application, please reach out either to myself or directly to Frank, and we'll hopefully we can help you guys answer any application security, ASPM questions, or how we can build an AppSec DevSecOps frameworks going forward. So thank you very much.
And if you are on OWASP, you get access to this. Going back to the community, we donated infinite amount of license to OWASP for all the community to jump on the platform, because we want to enable everybody to do that scanning and asset lineage in an easier way without spending millions. And then if they want to grow with us, they can grow with us, or they can keep the platform forever.
Yeah, there you go. There's some amazing tips from Frank, how you can get a free license in Phoenix. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you for coming along, Frank. Wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Marius, and everybody. Do your AppSec and stay safe.